Nyla had always been afraid of crowds. It wasn't the noise that terrified her, though the noise was overwhelming. It wasn't the press of bodies, though that made her skin crawl. It was the hands, the endless, grasping hands that reached for her without warning, without permission, without care for the panic that seized her throat and stole her breath. Growing up in the brothel district of the lower city had taught her that lesson early. Hands meant danger. Hands meant pain. Hands meant men who thought her body was theirs to grab, to grope, to claim. She had escaped that life 3 years ago, had clawed her way out through sheer desperation and a willingness to work herself to the bone. Now she was a seamstress in the merchant quarter, respectable, invisible, safe. She kept her head down. She avoided crowded streets. She flinched at sudden movements and slept with a knife under her pillow. She survived. But surviving wasn't the same as living, and today, survival had dragged her somewhere she never wanted to be. The market square was packed with bodies. Hundreds of people had gathered to witness the Lycan king's procession through the capital. He was returning from the northern territories after months of negotiations, and the entire city had turned out to welcome him home. Street vendors hawked commemorative trinkets. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders. Musicians played triumphant melodies from every corner. And Nyla was trapped in the middle of it all. She'd only meant to cut through the square, a shortcut to deliver a commission to a client on the other side of the city. She hadn't known about the procession, hadn't known the streets would be closed, the crowds impassable, the square transformed into a sea of bodies that pressed against her from every direction. Now she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stand frozen as the panic clawed up her throat and the crowd pushed in tighter. Someone's elbow caught her ribs. She gasped. A hand brushed her hip. Accidental, probably, but it didn't matter. Her vision went white. Her chest seized. She was back in the brothel district, 14 years old, hands reaching for her in the dark. She had to get out. Had to escape. Had to... She shoved blindly, desperately, not caring where she was going as long as it was away. The crowd resisted, then parted, and suddenly she stumbled forward into an empty space that shouldn't have existed. She fell to her knees on the cobblestones, gasping, trembling, tears streaming down her face. It took her a moment to realize why the space was empty. She looked up. The Lycan king's procession had stopped directly in front of her. Mounted guards surrounded her, their horses stamping impatiently. Armored soldiers formed a perimeter, hands on weapons, eyes scanning for threats. And in the center of it all, astride a massive black stallion, sat the king himself. He was looking directly at her. Nyla's heart stopped. The Lycan king was everything the stories said. Enormous. Even seated on horseback, he seemed to tower over everyone. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from mountain stone. A jaw that spoke of centuries of command. And eyes. Golden eyes that burned like embers, ancient and fierce, and fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. For a long, terrible moment, neither of them moved. Then the king dismounted. The crowd gasped. Guards moved to intercept him, but he waved them off with a gesture so casual it might have been brushing away a fly. He walked toward her, a trembling wreck on her knees in the middle of his procession, with steps that were slow and deliberate, and somehow gentle. He stopped a few feet away. "Are you hurt?" The question was quiet, private, meant only for her, despite the hundreds of eyes watching their every move. Nyla couldn't answer, couldn't find her voice. All she could do was stare up at this impossible creature who had stopped his entire procession for a panic-stricken seamstress. Something shifted in his expression. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. He crouched down, bringing himself to her level, and the crowd's murmurs grew louder. A king didn't kneel. A king didn't lower himself. A king certainly didn't crouch in the dirt before a common woman like she was something precious. But this king did. "You're safe," he said softly. "No one is going to hurt you. Can you tell me your name?" Nyla." The word came out as a whisper. "Nyla." He said it like it meant something, like she meant something. "I'm Lucian. Can you stand?" She tried. Her legs wouldn't cooperate. The trembling had spread through her entire body, and every time she tried to push herself up, her muscles refused to obey. Lucian, the Lycan king, she reminded herself, though the name felt too simple for someone so vast, watched her struggle for a moment. Then he held out his hand. "May I help you?" "May I?" He was asking permission. The most powerful Lycan in the realm was asking a shaking seamstress for permission to touch her. Something cracked inside Nyla's chest. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and careful. He rose smoothly, pulling her up with him, and she found herself standing on unsteady legs with his hand still wrapped around hers, like an anchor. "The crowd," she managed. I don't." "I know." His golden eyes held hers. "You don't have to explain." "I need to get out. I need to leave. But there are so many people, and I can't." "Walk with me." The words cut through her panic like a blade through silk. "What?" Lucian stepped closer, positioning himself at her side. His presence was overwhelming. Heat and power and something wild that she should have found terrifying but somehow didn't. "Walk with me," he repeated, his voice low, meant only for her. "No one dares touch you while you're at my side. I'll get you out of this crowd. I'll take you somewhere safe. But your procession can wait." His jaw tightened. "You're more important." Nyla stared at him. She didn't understand. Couldn't understand. She was nobody. A seamstress from the merchant quarter, a former street rat from the brothel district. Why would a king stop his homecoming procession for her? Why would he look at her like she mattered? But his hand was warm around hers, and his eyes were kind beneath the ancient power, and the crowd that had seemed so threatening moments ago had fallen back, leaving a clear path wherever the king looked. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Lucian tucked her hand into the crook of his arm and began to walk. The crowd parted before them like water before a ship. No one pushed. No one grabbed. No one dared come within arm's reach of the Lycan king and the trembling woman at his side. Nyla felt the panic begin to recede, replaced by something else. Something warm and unfamiliar that bloomed in her chest with every step. She didn't know what this was, didn't know why this king had chosen to help her, to protect her, to look at her like she was worth stopping a procession for. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel afraid. And that terrified her more than anything. Lucian led her to a quiet courtyard behind the palace walls. It was a small space, tucked away from the main thoroughfares, surrounded by high stone walls covered in climbing roses. A fountain burbled softly in the center. Birds sang in the branches of an old oak tree. After the chaos of the market square, it felt like stepping into another world. Nyla sank onto a stone bench, her legs finally giving out beneath her. Her hands were still shaking, her heart was still racing. But the panic had receded to a manageable hum, no longer the screaming terror that had seized her in the crowd. Lucian stood a few feet away, watching her with those impossible golden eyes. Better? He asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Take your time. He didn't sit, didn't move closer, just stood there, solid and patient, like a mountain waiting for a storm to pass. There's no rush. Nyla focused on her breathing. In, out, in, out. The techniques she'd taught herself over years of managing the panic that lived in her chest like a caged animal. When she finally felt steady enough to speak, she looked up at him. Why? The question came out hoarse, cracked. Why what? Why did you help me? You're the king. You were in the middle of your homecoming procession. Thousands of people were watching. She shook her head. I'm nobody, a seamstress. You should have had your guards move me aside and continued on. That's what anyone else would have done. Lucian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. You were afraid, he said. Truly afraid. Not of me, but of the crowd. I could see it in your face. The panic, the desperation. His jaw tightened. I've seen that look before, on the faces of people who have been hurt, who have learned to fear the world because the world has given them every reason to. Nyla's throat constricted. I couldn't walk past that, Lucian continued. I couldn't pretend I didn't see it. Not when... He stopped, something flickering in his expression. Not when everything in me demanded that I help you. Everything in you? He held her gaze. Do you know what a mate bond is, Nyla? The words hung in the air between them. Nyla had heard of mate bonds. Everyone had. The legendary connection between Lycans and their destined partners. The instant recognition. The unbreakable tie. But those were stories. Fairy tales. They happened to noble ladies and powerful Lycans, not to seamstresses with panic attacks and pasts they couldn't escape. That's not possible, she whispered. I can't be. You are. Lucian's voice was gentle but certain. The moment you fell into my path, I knew. My soul recognized yours. Every instinct I have screamed at me to protect you, to help you, to make sure you were safe. He took a careful step closer. That's why I stopped the procession. That's why I walked you out of the crowd. That's why I can't... His voice cracked. I can't walk away from you, Nyla. Even if you want me to. Nyla's mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real. She was a street rat who had clawed her way to respectability. She was damaged goods, broken by a childhood no one should have survived. She flinched at touch and feared crowds and woke up screaming from nightmares she couldn't escape. She wasn't mate material. She wasn't queen material. She wasn't anything. You don't know me, she said, her voice shaking. You don't know what I am, where I came from, the things I've... Then tell me. The request was simple, open, without judgment or expectation. Nyla looked at him. This king who had stopped his world for her, who stood in this quiet courtyard waiting for her to decide whether she would trust him, and felt something shift inside her chest. I grew up in the brothel district, she said. The words came out flat, defensive, waiting for the disgust, the dismissal, the change in his expression that always came when people learned the truth. My mother worked there. I was born there. I spent the first 17 years of my life surrounded by... She stopped, unable to continue. Lucian didn't flinch, didn't look away. His golden eyes held hers with steady, unwavering attention. Go on, he said quietly, if you want to. I wasn't. They didn't. She took a shaky breath. My mother protected me as long as she could, kept me hidden. But when she died, I was alone, and the owner of the establishment decided it was time for me to start earning my keep. Lucian's expression didn't change, but something in the air around him seemed to darken. A cold, dangerous energy that made Nyla's skin prickle. I ran, she continued, before anything happened. I was 14. I lived on the streets for 3 years, doing whatever I could to survive. And then I found work as a seamstress's apprentice. And I clawed my way up. And I built a life that was small and safe and mine. Her voice broke. But I'm still that street rat. I still flinch when people touch me. I still can't be in crowds without panicking. I'm broken, Lucian. I've been broken since before I can remember. Silence filled the courtyard. The fountain burbled, the birds sang, and Lucian stood there, motionless, processing everything she'd said. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "You're not broken. You don't—" "You're not broken," he repeated, fiercer now. "You're a survivor. You escaped a situation that would have destroyed most people. You built a life from nothing. You taught yourself to be strong in a world that tried to break you." He crossed the distance between them, crouching before the bench so they were eye to eye. "That's not broken, Nyla. That's extraordinary." Tears burned in her eyes. "You don't understand." "I understand that you're afraid." His voice was gentle. "I understand that you've been hurt. I understand that trusting anyone, trusting me, feels impossible right now." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face but not touching. "Asking permission, even now. But I'm not going anywhere. I will wait as long as you need. I will prove myself in whatever way you require, and I will never, ever touch you without your consent." A tear slipped down her cheek. Lucian's hand remained suspended in the air, patient, waiting. Slowly, so slowly, Nyla leaned her cheek into his palm. His breath caught. His fingers trembled against her skin. But he didn't move, didn't push, didn't take more than she offered. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Neither do I." A ghost of a smile crossed his features. "But I'd like to learn. With you. If you'll let me." She looked at him, this ancient king with gentle hands and patient eyes, who had stopped his entire world because she was afraid. "Okay," she breathed. "Teach me." Learning, Nyla discovered, was a slow and tender process. Lucian didn't rush her, didn't push for more than she could give. He seemed to understand, instinctively, that trust was something she would have to build brick by brick, and he was willing to lay each one with patient, careful hands. He gave her rooms in the palace, her own suite, far from his chambers, with a lock on the door that only she could open. He assigned her a guard who stood outside, not to keep her in, but to keep everyone else out. He made it clear to his entire household that she was to be treated with respect and given space, and he visited her. Every day, without fail, he would knock on her door and wait for her permission to enter. Some days, they talked for hours. He told her about his life, 3 centuries of ruling, of wars fought and treaties signed, of watching the world change around him while he remained constant. He spoke of loneliness with a matter-of-factness that broke her heart, of centuries spent searching for a mate he'd begun to believe didn't exist. "And then you fell into my path," he said one evening, a wry smile on his lips. "Literally." "I didn't fall," Nyla protested. "I stumbled dramatically." He laughed, a real laugh, warm and surprised, and something in her chest loosened at the sound. Other days, they sat in comfortable silence. Nyla would work on her sewing. She'd insisted on continuing her commissions, needing the normalcy of work, the familiar rhythm of needle and thread. Lucian would read or review documents, his presence a steady warmth across the room. He never sat too close, never reached for her without asking, never made her feel trapped or cornered or afraid. And slowly, impossibly, she began to relax. "Can I show you something?" she asked one afternoon, 3 weeks after the day in the market square. Lucian looked up from his papers, golden eyes curious. Of course. She held up the fabric she'd been working on. A handkerchief, simple but elegant, embroidered with tiny golden wolves running along the border. "I made this for you," she said, her cheeks flushing, "to say thank you for everything." Lucian set down his papers and crossed to her, his movements careful, telegraphed. He took the handkerchief from her hands, his fingers brushing hers, and she didn't flinch. She didn't flinch. The realization hit them both at the same moment. Lucian's eyes widened, Nyla's breath caught. "You didn't pull away," he said softly. "I didn't." She stared at their hands, still touching, her skin warm where his fingers met hers. "I didn't even think about it, I just trusted me." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "Yes," she whispered. "I think I did." Lucian raised the handkerchief to his lips, pressing a kiss to the embroidered wolves. "I will treasure this," he said. "Always." That night, Nyla lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She had touched him, had let him touch her. And it hadn't felt like danger, like threat, like hands reaching out of the darkness to grab her. It had felt like warmth, like safety, like coming home to a place she'd never known existed. She was falling for him. She could feel it happening, slow and inevitable as a sunrise. The way her heart lifted when he knocked on her door. The way she found herself smiling at his terrible jokes. The way his presence had become the anchor around which her days revolved. But could she give him more? Could she be what he needed? A queen? A partner? A mate? Could she overcome the fear that had shaped her entire life? She didn't know, but for the first time, she wanted to try. The next day, she asked him to take her outside. "Are you sure?" Lucian's voice was careful. "There will be people. I can clear the gardens if you prefer." "No." Nyla took a breath. "I want to try. With people there. I just—" She met his eyes. "I need you beside me." Something fierce and tender blazed in his golden gaze. "Always." They walked through the palace gardens together, Nyla's hand tucked into the crook of his arm. Servants passed by, bowing respectfully. Guards nodded acknowledgement. A group of nobles stopped to pay their respects, their eyes curious as they took in the king's mysterious companion. Nyla felt the old panic stirring in her chest, the awareness of bodies nearby, of hands that could reach for her, of danger that might be lurking in any crowd. But Lucian's arm was solid beneath her hand. His presence was a wall between her and the world, not trapping her, but shielding her. And when a servant stepped too close and Nyla's breath caught, Lucian simply shifted his position, placing himself between her and the perceived threat without breaking stride. "Better?" he murmured. "How did you know?" "Your breathing changed." He glanced down at her. "I pay attention." She felt tears prick at her eyes. No one's ever paid attention before. Then everyone before was a fool. His voice was matter-of-fact. You're worth paying attention to, Neela. You're worth everything. By the time they completed their circuit of the gardens, Nyla was trembling, but not from fear, from something else entirely, something that felt like triumph. I did it, she breathed. You did. Lucian's smile was radiant. I knew you could. I couldn't have done it without you. You could have. He stopped, turning to face her fully. You've been doing impossible things your whole life, Nyla. Surviving when you should have broken. Building when you should have crumbled. You're the strongest person I've ever met. His hand came up, hovering near her face, waiting for permission. She nodded. His palm cupped her cheek, warm and gentle, and so achingly tender that something inside her finally cracked open. I love you, she said. The words surprised her. She hadn't planned to say them, hadn't known they were true until they escaped her lips. But they were true, desperately, terrifyingly true. Lucian's eyes went bright. His hand trembled against her cheek. Say it again, he whispered. I love you. And now she was crying, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't care. I love you, Lucian. I didn't think I was capable of it. I thought that part of me was dead. But you, her voice cracked. You brought me back to life. He kissed her. It was soft, careful, a question rather than a demand. His lips barely brushed hers, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't pull away. She leaned in, deepening the kiss, letting herself feel for the first time in her life, letting herself want, letting herself be wanted. When they parted, they were both trembling. I love you too, Lucian breathed. I have loved you since the moment you fell into my path. I will love you until the stars burn out and the mountains crumble to dust. She laughed through her tears. That's a long time. Not long enough. He pressed his forehead to hers. 1,000 lifetimes wouldn't be long enough to love you the way you deserve. They stood together in the garden, two broken people who had somehow found each other, and Nyla felt something she hadn't felt in 20 years. Whole. She felt whole. The whispers started within days. Nyla had known they would. A king didn't spend weeks devoted to a common seamstress without the court taking notice. A king didn't walk through gardens holding hands with a woman no one had ever seen before without tongues wagging and rumours spreading like wildfire. She heard the whispers when she walked through the palace corridors, saw the sidelong glances, the raised eyebrows, the barely concealed sneers. A seamstress, one noble muttered to another as Nyla passed. From the merchant quarter. Can you imagine? I heard she's from somewhere worse than that, the other replied. The lower city, near the establishments. Nyla kept walking, her back straight, her expression carefully blank. She'd survived worse than whispers. She'd survived worse than sneers. But it still hurt, and she hated that it still hurt. Lucian found her that evening in her chambers, sitting by the window, staring out at the city lights below. I heard what Lady Evander said, he said quietly, about your origins. It's not a secret. Nyla's voice was flat. I never lied about where I came from. You shouldn't have to. He crossed to her, crouching beside her chair the way he had that first day in the courtyard. Your past doesn't define your worth, Nyla. It never has. It does to them. She gestured toward the window, toward the palace beyond. To your court. To the nobles who will never see me as anything but a street rat who got lucky. They'll learn. Will they? She finally looked at him, and the doubt in her eyes made his heart clench. I've spent my whole life being invisible, Lucian. And now suddenly everyone's looking at me, and all they see is the worst parts of where I came from. They don't see me. They see a scandal, an embarrassment, a dash. Stop. His voice was gentle but firm. You are not a scandal. You are not an embarrassment. You are the woman I love, the woman I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. And if the court can't see your value, that's their failure, not yours. But I will make them see. His golden eyes blazed with determination. I will stand beside you in every hall, at every feast, in every council meeting. I will hold your hand and look at you like you hung the stars. Because you did, Nyla. You are my stars, my moon, my entire night sky. He took her hands in his. And anyone who dares to disrespect you will answer to me. A knock at the door interrupted them. Your Majesty. A guard's voice, urgent. There's a situation in the Great Hall. A merchant from the lower city is demanding an audience. He claims he has a prior claim on your companion. Nyla's blood went cold. She knew, before the guard even said his name, who it would be. Knew with a certainty that made her stomach turn and her hands shake. Gregor Vance, the owner of the brothel where she'd grown up. The man who had tried to claim her after her mother died. The monster she'd fled from 10 years ago. He had found her. Nyla. Lucian's voice was steady, but she could feel the tension radiating from him. Who is this man? Gregor Vance. The name tasted like poison. He owned the establishment where I grew up, where my mother worked. When she died, he said I belonged to him, that I was property, that my mother's debts made me his too. She couldn't finish. Lucian's expression went dark. Dangerous. The air around him seemed to thicken with barely contained fury. Stay here, he said. I'll handle this. No. The word came out stronger than she expected. I'm coming with you. Nyla, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She stood, squaring her shoulders despite the trembling in her limbs. I've been running from him for 10 years, running from what he represents, what he tried to do to me. If I hide now, I'll be running forever. She met his eyes. I want to face him. I want him to see what I've become. I want him to know that he doesn't own me, that he never did. Pride blazed in Lucian's golden gaze. He cupped her face in his hands, a gesture that had become familiar, cherished, safe. Together, then, he said. We face him together. The great hall fell silent when they entered. Gregor Vance stood in the center of the room, flanked by 2 nervous-looking guards. He was older than Nyla remembered, greyer, softer, his cruel features starting to sag with age. But his eyes were the same, cold, calculating. The eyes of a predator who had never been denied his prey. Until now. There she is! Gregor's voice rang out, sharp and triumphant. The runaway, the thief. I've been searching for this one for 10 years, Your Majesty. She belongs to me. Her mother's debts transferred to her upon death. By law, she's my property, until those debts are paid. Nyla felt the old fear rising, the old instinct to shrink, to cower, to make herself small and invisible. But Lucian's hand was warm around hers, steady and solid, and she forced herself to stand tall. I am no one's property, she said. Her voice came out clear, stronger than she'd ever heard it. I never was. Gregor laughed. The debt is documented, girl. Your mother owed me. My mother owed you nothing. Nyla stepped forward, and Gregor actually flinched back. You trapped her. You kept her in debt through manipulation and exploitation. You did the same to dozens of women. And when she died, you tried to do it to me. The law does not recognize debt slavery. Lucian's voice cut through the hall like a blade of ice. Not in my kingdom, not anywhere in the realm. He descended from the dais, each footstep echoing like thunder. You come into my hall, into my home, and you dare to claim ownership of my mate? Gregor's face went white. Your mate? My mate, my queen, the other half of my soul. Lucian stopped directly in front of Gregor, looming over him like a mountain of barely contained fury. The woman you tried to enslave when she was 14 years old. The woman you have apparently been hunting for a decade. I didn't know. I couldn't have known. It wouldn't matter if she were a common seamstress. Lucian's voice dropped to something cold and terrible. It wouldn't matter if she had no connection to me at all. Debt slavery is a crime. The exploitation you've engaged in for years is a crime. And now you've confessed to both, in front of my entire court. Guards moved toward Gregor, and the man began to panic. Your Majesty, please, this is a misunderstanding. I never meant— Take him to the dungeons, Lucian said. He'll await trial for his crimes. All of them. As the guards seized Gregor, Nyla stepped forward. Wait. Everyone froze. She walked toward her tormentor, this man who had haunted her nightmares for a decade, and watched him shrink before her. You told me once that I was worthless, she said quietly, that no one would ever want me, that I should be grateful for whatever scraps you decided to give me. She held his terrified gaze. You were wrong. About everything. I am wanted. I am valued. I am loved. And you? She smiled, cold and sharp. You will rot in a cell while I become queen. She turned her back on him and walked to Lucian's side. Gregor's screams echoed through the hall as the guards dragged him away. Lucian pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. I am so proud of you, he murmured. I'm proud of me too. She looked up at him, and for the first time she truly meant it. I faced him, after all these years. I finally faced him. You didn't just face him. Lucian's eyes blazed with fierce love. You destroyed him, without raising a hand, without shedding a tear. You stood in front of the monster who haunted your nightmares and showed him exactly what you've become. Nyla smiled, a real smile, full and bright and unafraid. I became someone who doesn't cower anymore, she said. I became yours. Mine, he agreed, and I am forever yours. The bonding ceremony was held in the market square. It was Nyla's idea. Lucian had offered her the grandest venue in the kingdom, the palace ballroom, the ancient temple, the royal gardens, but she had shaken her head and asked for something different. The square, she said. Where you found me, where everything changed. He had looked at her with something like wonder. Are you sure? There will be crowds, thousands of people. I know. She took his hand, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. That's the point. I spent my whole life being afraid of crowds, afraid of being seen, afraid of being touched. She met his golden eyes. I don't want to be afraid anymore. I want to stand in the place where I fell apart and show the world, show myself, how far I've come. So the market square it was. The space had been transformed for the occasion. Banners of gold and silver hung from every building. Flowers cascaded from window boxes and lined the cobblestones. A dais had been erected in the center, draped in white silk, where the high priestess waited to perform the ceremony. And the crowds had come. Thousands of people filled the square, spilling into side streets and climbing onto rooftops for a better view. They had come from every corner of the kingdom, nobles and commoners, merchants and farmers, the wealthy and the poor. Word had spread of the seamstress who had captured the king's heart, the street rat who would become queen, and they had come to witness it for themselves. Neela stood at the edge of the square, looking out at the sea of faces, and felt her heart begin to race. "We can still change the venue." Lucian's voice was soft beside her. "Say the word, and we'll move to the palace. No one will think less of you." "No." She took a breath, then another. "I want to do this. I need to do this." "Then I'm right beside you." He offered his arm. "Walk with me." She smiled at the echo of his words from that first day, the day he had found her cowering in this very square and offered her his protection. "Always," she said, and placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. They walked into the crowd together. The people parted before them, just as they had months ago. But this time, Nyla didn't feel hunted, didn't feel trapped. She felt celebrated. Hands reached out, not to grab, but to offer flowers, to wave, to blow kisses. Voices called out blessings and congratulations. Children held up by their parents shouted her name. Her name. They knew her name. By the time they reached the dais, Nyla was crying, not from fear, not from panic, from overwhelming, impossible joy. The high priestess smiled as they took their places before her. "We gather today to witness the bonding of two souls," she began, her voice carrying across the silent square. "Lucian, king of the Lycans, and Nyla, his chosen mate. Two hearts that found each other against all odds. Two lives that became one." Nyla listened to the ancient words, but her eyes never left Lucian's face. This man who had stopped his entire world for a panicking seamstress, who had asked permission before every touch, who had waited, patient and unwavering, while she learned to trust again. She loved him, completely, irrevocably, with every broken piece of herself that he had helped put back together. "Do you, Lucian, take this woman as your bonded mate?" the priestess asked, "to cherish and protect, to honor and uplift, for all the days of your existence?" "I do." His voice rang clear across the square. "I have waited 300 years for her. I would have waited 300 more." "And do you, Nyla, take this man as your bonded mate? To cherish and support? To trust and stand beside? For all the days of your existence?" Nyla thought of the girl who had cowered in this square, terrified of hands and crowds and the world that had hurt her so deeply. She thought of the woman she had become, someone who faced her fears, who trusted again, who loved again. "I do," she said. "He found me when I was lost. He saw me when I was invisible. He taught me that I was worth protecting." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for the day he whispered, 'Walk with me.'" The priestess smiled. "Then let the bond be sealed." Lucian cupped her face in his hands, that gesture she had learned to crave, to trust, to love. "I love you," he said, "more than words can express, more than eternity can contain." "I love you too." She rose on her toes and kissed him. The crowd erupted. Cheers and howls of celebration filled the air. a wave of sound that washed over them like a blessing. Nyla felt the bond seal in her chest, a warmth that flooded through her, connecting her to Lucian in a way that transcended the physical. She could feel his love, his joy, his fierce protective devotion, and she knew he could feel hers. When they finally parted, both laughing and crying, the priestess raised her voice above the din. "I present to you your queen, Queen Nyla of Blackmoor." The cheering intensified. People threw flower petals into the air. Music started up from somewhere in the crowd. Joyful, celebratory, alive. Nyla looked out at the sea of faces, these thousands of people who had come to witness her transformation, and felt something she had never felt before. She belonged. 1 year later, Nyla stood on the palace balcony, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and rose. So much had changed. She had changed. The woman who had cowered from crowds now walked through the market square weekly, stopping to talk with vendors and children and anyone who wanted a moment of her time. The woman who had flinched from touch now reached for her husband's hand without thinking, curled against him at night without fear, welcomed his embrace like coming home. She was still healing. Some days were harder than others. Sometimes the old panic stirred, and she had to remind herself that she was safe, that she was loved, that hands reaching for her now meant comfort rather than harm. But she was no longer defined by her fear. She was no longer the girl who cowered. She was a queen, a wife, a survivor who had become something more. "You're thinking again." Lucian's arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin coming to rest on top of her head. "I can feel it through the bond." Just reflecting, she leaned back into his warmth. "On how different my life is now. On how different I am." "You're not different." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "You're just finally becoming who you were always meant to be." She turned in his arms to face him. "And who is that?" "Someone brave." He kissed her forehead. "Someone strong." He kissed her nose. "Someone who faces her fears instead of running from them." He kissed her lips, soft and lingering. "Someone worthy of all the love in the world." "You're biased." Hopelessly. His golden eyes sparkled. "But also right." She laughed, pulling him closer, marveling at how natural it felt. How right. "Thank you," she said, "for that day in the square, for seeing me when I was invisible, for whispering, 'Walk with me,' when I was too afraid to take a single step. Thank you for walking with me." He cupped her face in his hands, that gesture that had once been a question and had become a promise. "Thank you for trusting me, for loving me, for letting me be part of your journey." She kissed him as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting them both in golden light. Once, she had been a girl who cowered from crowds, terrified of hands and touch and being seen. Now she was a queen who walked through the world with her head held high, her hand in her king's, her heart full of a love she had never dared to dream of. And she would never cower again. If you enjoyed Nyla and Lucian's story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. Leave a comment below telling me your favorite part, and I'll see you in the next one.